This is a Renew original recording. Hello and welcome to Believe in People, a British podcast award-winning series about all things addiction, recovery and stigma. My name is Matthew Butler and I'm your host, or as I like to say, your facilitator. Today I'm with Chris Tait, a multifaceted musician and advocate whose journey is as inspiring as it is transformative. As the keyboardist for the band Electric Six, he has travelled the world captivating audiences with his music. Beyond the stage, Chris has channeled his personal experiences into founding Passenger Recovery, a Detroit-based initiative supporting touring musicians, artists and local communities in their recovery journeys. His story is one of resilience and reinvention, showcasing the power of creativity and connection in overcoming personal challenges. To begin our conversation, I asked Chris about how his addiction shaped his life during Electric Six's rise to fame and what led to the turning point that inspired his recovery.
As much as I'd love to hang my hat on rock and roll, making me into somebody who was an alcoholic and an addict, and I use that language openly because I talk about it openly. I don't mean to offend anybody. I could say substance use disorder, whatever anybody's comfortable with. But I'm okay with saying that, and that's what I am, and it's okay. It's using that language. It's just a general reminder to me of who I am, and I'm totally comfortable with that. I have no shame attached to it, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later. But I don't believe that my life would be what it is today without having to. I don't know that there's a version of me that doesn't go through that struggle, and I don't know that my life would be as incredible as it is without having been informed through that journey from substance use to recovery. So anyways, it started a long time before rock and roll or music or anything. Not necessarily before music, but I guess, when I was a young person, I think like a lot of people, I felt like something wasn't right. I had weird dreams about people in my family being murdered. There was a little bit of indoctrination happening. There were things that made me feel like things just weren't right. And as a young man, I went to parties, sat around the bonfire, put Led Zeppelin on, drank beer with people. That was one thing. But specifically in 1992, on the opening day of the Detroit Tigers baseball season, I skipped school with a friend, and we got into some hard liquor. And that was the day that I remember things changing. I was 15. And when I say things changing, anybody who has been in my situation will know exactly what I'm talking about, like magic in a bottle. It wasn't a beer here or there. It was, I felt 2 feet taller. I was communicating with people. Girls were interested. It did the thing that alcohol did for me early on. I guess a few years down the line from that, it progressed like I think anybody in my situation, like it progresses. If it's good once, it must be better more often. And if it's good on the weekends, it must be better every day, or weekdays or whatever. And there was a point when I was in high school, I was a 17-year-old junior in high school, where I was, I was making what we called road pops to go to high school to have on the way into school. And I was driving to school in the morning, and I realized that I had left it, like the vodka and soda thing. I'd left the bottle on the bed at the family house. And as it hit, within a split second of that, before I even really knew what was going on, I was turning the car around to go back. And it did signify something then. It definitely did. But when I look back on it now, that was really the first time where I said, whoa, what's going on here? Like, why did that just happen? And was that the beginning of, I need this as a coping mechanism? So that was the first time when it was like, okay, something about my actions just now didn't kind of surprised me. But by the time I got out of high school, which was only a year and a half later, I couldn't go to sleep without having a drink. And so for me personally, I believe that for all of us, our issues or our vices are the solution before they become the problem. And I know a lot of people say that, but why would we bother otherwise? It whether it's a social thing, whether it's a trauma thing, whatever has happened that we need relief from, when we find it, why would we go anywhere else, you know?
So yours sounds like, it sounds like a social thing in the way that it's helped make you feel, but you talked a little bit about family life and indoctrination and things like that. Was it an escape from things that was happening like at home? Was there anything there that was bringing you to that point of, finding that release, I suppose, in alcohol, what it was giving you there?
My family, I was very fortunate because my family was they're incredible people. They're just working class Detroit folks. My dad and my uncle had a little machine shop. My grandfather was a Scottish immigrant. Strong work ethic, but also very in the family. So I'm going to kind of go all over the place.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely fine. Yeah. I completely understand that.
Okay. So what I've learned over the years, and should I save this for later?
No, honestly, just say it as it comes to you. Okay. Yeah, that's probably the best way.
Our family had a great work ethic. My folks are religious people, but when they're they do maintenance around their little town that they live in. They do hot dog giveaways. They work on their church. Like it's a very different. Their actions, that's something that they taught me is that they let their actions speak for them. But around that, for sure, there was a little bit there, inherently, I think with any kind of organized religion, there is some stuff that goes on. I don't really want to get into the details of that, but something did happen to me. Two things happened to me that kind of shaped where I went with alcohol. One was that we kind of moved out of a town where I had existed and really loved because we were very close to it was a town in the middle of nowhere, but it was right next to Ann Arbor. And Ann Arbor, Michigan is where everyone would go for import records. And that music has always been my first passion. So, and I had these are kind of gold-plated problems, but what that led to the same year that we kind of moved across the county that we were in was that I got into a really bad car accident and I was in a coma for a week. And I remembered, all of this, like there was a lot of surgery that had to be done and internal brain and head damage. And this had all been kind of split and destroyed. And I just remembered waking up going, there's nobody looking out for me, with regards to the religious things that were taught to me and a lot of fire and brimstone kind of things that had happened early on in life. It just sent me further down the path of something isn't right. And the way I view the world is being informed by something that I can't really explain. And when I say that, what I mean is by the time that I reached alcohol, it was one more thing that was just removed by that, Yeah. So by the time I was 15, the two things I really cared about were music and escape, one way, shape, or form. So before I even met, really had that significant change with alcohol use, music was an escape for me. I loved bands like Blondie and The Cure, bands that were really theatrical, that kind of created their own worlds. But what I wanted to say about the family is it's interesting because I have a great relationship with the people that I didn't talk to for decades now, thanks to sobriety, recovery. But it's been interesting talking to them about what happened in the history of our family before I was even born. Because my grandfather was an alcoholic and he died very young. And when he died, my dad and my uncle, who had both been through Vietnam, my uncle had issues to the end of his life with drinking. And my dad was basically forced into kind of working on the family business. And he wanted to be a history teacher. And none of this is explained. The family dynamic isn't really explained to you. Well, it wasn't explained to me. I kind of had to seek it out. But learning what happened, why it happened, and learning more about the characters that shaped me as a person really made it so much more clear why things were the way they were when I was young and what led to me becoming, an active alcoholic.
Just on that topic then, I think it's always an interesting argument when I hear people talk about the inheritance of alcoholism or being an alcoholic as a disease that is genetically passed on from our parents, from our grandparents. Based on your experiences, would you agree with that? Would you think that was the case, or do you think it was social circumstance that and just the habitual thrill that you got from it? How would you have viewed the alcoholism and being an alcoholic?
I think it's all of those things. You know, I think it takes a perfect storm, but when it's a lot of variables that go into somebody having that gene versus somebody being an active alcoholic. I know a lot of people, I mean, myself included, I would say I was a dry drunk before I was an actual active alcoholic. Excuse me. The same thing, like the moods, the sense of dread, all of those things that alcohol took away were there before I started drinking. The music that saved my life also probably didn't help because I listened to a lot of very sometimes heavy and dark stuff, but it was what I needed at the time. I certainly don't regret any of that. But yeah, so anyways, I mean, with regards to the reason I bring up the family is because, like, I believe with sobriety, I have learned things in stages and chapters, and that was something that I didn't even really get into until I met somebody who suggested I do it. And the idea of, you know, you keep your mouth shut, you go back to work, you get things done, you don't talk about things. I'm not going to say that was like, nobody browbeat that into me, but it was definitely a thread through the family. And when I delved a little bit further into the history of the family, it was very easy to see why that was. You know, it was because a lot of people that were working very hard through things and to keep food on the table for the family. Anyways, so to go back to my teenage years.
Yeah, sorry, that's me. That's go on, continue, please.
Yeah, sorry, kind of a crazy sidebar there, but yeah, by the time I was out of high school, I couldn't, I was a kind of functioning alcoholic already, and so flash forward a few years, I along with a slew of other kind of Detroit garage rock people. I was playing in 3 different bands and working at a brewery and kind of had surrounded myself with alcohol and drugs and music because those 3 things all go together. But half of the people, I'm sure this is the truth in any major city, half the people who are in bands are also working in restaurants and that kind of thing. But I was living with the drummer for Electric Six at the time. Then the band was called the Wild Bunch then. It was about 2001. And everybody was, like I said, I was playing in a few bands. The Wild Bunch needed a keyboardist. So I started playing with them. And then basically, like a few months later, I had gone to see, everybody kind of went to see each other's bands in town. And the Wild Bunch / Electric Six was kind of a welcome break. You're talking about the town that gave us Eminem, MC5, Iggy Pop, Madonna, all of Motown. They take music pretty seriously. And I took music pretty seriously. I remember the first time I went to see the band. It was only one of their first couple shows, but they played a place called The Shelter, which is below St. Andrews in Detroit. And it's these guys with leather jackets. They didn't have a keyboardist on stage. This guy's black leather jackets and aviator sunglasses, and then the singer has like a Jamaican shirt on. And, they're doing their thing, and he starts doing push-ups on stage, and he's sweating profusely, and he tears the shirt off, and he's not exactly in shape, and he throws it at a guy in the audience. And then when the song, ends, he's like, "Thank you. I'm going to need that back at the end of the night." And that was Dick Valentine / Tyler. And I was just mystified. It's like, I didn't think anybody down here had a sense of humor about music, But it was great. So the drummer and I worked together at the time anyways, and so I would go see their shows because it was always something fun like that. And when they needed a keyboardist, I was thrilled. So was playing with the group at the beginning of what became like the pre-Fire chapter, which was our first record. So it was the record that produced hits over here. So we went from playing the Lager House, which is a venue in Detroit that holds about 250 people, to 6 months later mixing the first record at Abbey Road. Again, I'm not going to blame that kind of meteoric rise or descent after. I can't blame my use on that, but it certainly was not something I was prepared to handle. And so because of that, it was that much easier to increase my usage, to get through the amount of touring and recording and everything that we had to do. I mean, I was really fortunate. The things that we got to do in that first year, it was a combination. What happened that, the White Stripes happened, and then that kind of put the spotlight on Detroit. And at the time, there was a DJ collective from over here called Too Many DJs, and they started playing Electric Six once we did the name change. And then they put us on a comp where they did a mashup of the band with us with the Cramps. And so there was there were all these things that happened at just the right time, along with Detroit kind of having a spotlight on it. And that's nothing to take away from the band. I think we're a great band. Yeah. But, it definitely, there is a huge amount of chance or fate or things happening right place at the right time.
I'm glad you've said that, because I think when I look at success stories, so many people tend to mitigate that being a key point to any form of success. And it's like, follow this guidance, follow these rules. But a massive part of any amount of success is luck and chance. Yeah. And I think so many people, you read self-help books or something like that, and it's like, try and do this, and I was successful because of this. Completely mitigating the fact that so much of this can just be down to almost right place, right time in some way as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a very unique thing because of our singer, is like a game show host on stage. He's a very unique character. But there were a lot of great bands happening at the time. And truth be told, at the time, personally, there were probably 3 guys that I could point to in town that were better keyboard players than I was. So it is, you can say, yes, we put ourselves forward. Yes, we busted our butts. But that doesn't necessarily, it's not like a collegiate pathway where you're going, okay, I've taken these steps. It's not, I think an expectation is created by ourselves, but it's not really founded on anything, because you do have to have either a certain amount of luck or the right connections or X, Y, and Z for things to take off. And for us, it was definitely like the Too Many DJs comps and the fact that Jack was on High Voltage, because the White Stripes were in the process of putting Seven Nation Army out, which was, they were already huge, and then it just, so it was really, it was a great opportunity and time for us, and we're very fortunate to have been there. But yeah, I agree with you. That's not to take anything away from us or any other.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's looking at it from a, I guess, a point of view of knowledge, I suppose, really, which a lot of people don't do.
And that's a lesson in humility too. I mean, like, there's so many of those involved with, like, my relationship with the band before and after getting into recovery from drugs and alcohol, but even before, I might not have been willing to give those demons up, but I had to admit, like, I wanted to be, my whole life, I wanted to be in a very serious band. I listened to serious bands, and it was humbling to be lucky enough to get into any band that's been able to do what we did. But it's also it's called, like, friends of mine in the program call it a God wink, where somebody's giving you a nudge, like, you may not have expected this to be your path, but you're about to be able to get to do the things you always dreamed of doing as a kid, like getting to play Glastonbury and Jules Holland and these things that, like, were barely even, it was hard to even get to watch them. Yeah. You had to stay up to watch the midnight show on MTV to even be able to kind of see some of these bands and stuff. And we were having this opportunity to, back then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anyways, so it's definitely been a lesson in humility that a band that I never thought, that was something I'd be part of has really like paved the way. I never thought I would still be doing this 22 years later. And we've been really, really fortunate to have the fan base that we have.
Yeah. I remember seeing these things in like say early 2000s, those music videos, and being a fan of like Kerrang music and watching those channels. It was just so different from everything else that was on there that you couldn't help but take notice of it, because it didn't mix with everything else, but it still kind of hit those notes to be part of what you'd have maybe on your MP3 player, like that sort of genre of music, but it was so different as well.
Yeah.
And I think I've just got a quote here on the topic of obviously the music and alcoholisms. One of your quotes here, it says, "While I know I certainly can't blame music for my drinking habits, all of my addictions got worse being in an accelerated musical environment." Talk me through that then, the culture of music, like you said earlier about these things going hand in hand, working in bars, being in bands, all these sort of things. Talk me through that sort of acceleration of it.
Yeah, I mean, well, that kind of ties in with what we were just talking about with regards to like, it being very much the success, at least with us personally, being a list of variables. At the time, it was, well, of course this happened. This is the way things were supposed to go. Like there was still a huge amount of ego.
Yeah.
And I knew better.
Yeah.
But, everybody has their golden God moments. And that stuff is fueled by alcohol and drugs, right? But while we were out touring the world, I was getting in trouble with the law back home. So for 8 years, I didn't have a driver's license.
Yeah.
And that's another ego-related thing. I looked at it as a right, not a privilege. And when I got sober, I really had to work to get that back.
Yeah.
And it changed. That was another thing that really changed my perspective.
Did you lose the driving license from drink? Or yeah. So what was that situation?
I mean, it was the second time I'd gotten in trouble with the law. I'd spent some time in jail, and when I got out, they were like, "You're going to have to go through the process of probation, and then maybe get your restricted license back." And I was at the time, I was like, "Well, I'm not going to stop drinking, so I better just stop driving." Yeah, which is really, I mean, to say that now that's something. That's cunning, baffling, and powerful. Like that. That's where I was at with that. But that's where we get.
Yeah, right? I think, he talks about alcohol giving you the feelings of feeling 2 foot taller, the increased confidence, and there's something in that, he talks about something being the solution before it becomes the problem. I guess there's something in that in alcohol can give you so much, but it can also take so much away. I've got down here on my notes that you was hospitalised, that you lost your driving licence, you lost relationships with family and friends. That's all those things that it does take away.
Yeah, and by the time those things start happening, it's the problem, but it's got its claws in you. You know what I mean? So it's not, I think it's very enticing early on. I can see very clearly how and why I became an alcoholic. But by the time the consequences were starting to step on my neck, it had its claws in. So yeah, and it was interesting, so while we were on tour, these things were happening. Those consequences were starting to pile in at home. And I was still working as a bartender because I can drink as much as I want and work at the same time. Why not? It was one of those things. But when I lost my license, it was like, okay, well, I'm not going to be able to drive to work anymore, so I better just move in behind the bar, which I did. So I was literally like, alcohol, I was shaping my life around alcohol. Music was even kind of just something that was happening along with the using. Excuse me. And yeah, it was hospitalization. I don't want to go into war stories, but I actually, as of yesterday, had a bout with pancreatitis. It still flares up sometimes if I'm super stressed or too much caffeine or, I go wrong with my diet.
And that's even after 10 years of sobriety.
14 years.
14 years of sobriety.
Excuse me, 13 years. 14 April 4th.
So the long-term effects of it are still there that you're having to deal with now.
And I had dealt with it many times, and I, as a sober person, one of the cool parts about that is I get to go to the doctors, and I get to, talk to a dentist, and do the things that I never did as somebody that was active.
Yeah.
But so I know better. I know how to deal with it now. As opposed to the way it was then. Just kind of pretending it'll go away if I keep drinking through it, or waiting for it to heal itself and then going straight back to what I was wanting things to change without changing anything.
Yeah.
I know how to take care of it now, but I've had a lot of stress in my life, and I let things slip, and you get into tour mode and start eating like shit, and
just whatever you can eat, isn't it, when you're on the road and everything suddenly it's like, that's a good idea.
Yeah, so nowadays it's absolutely my issue, and I also know how to deal with it. It's up to me if I'm going to make the right choices.
Absolutely, yeah. So going back to first being introduced to alcohol at a young age, at what point did you realise that you was physically dependent on the substance? You told the story about having to go home to go get the mix that you'd made and whilst you was in high school, and that is kind of like that mental, I've got to go and get it. At what point did you realise your body was physically addicted to it? Like, when did you first experience withdrawal symptoms, and did you even connect the two, that the withdrawals were because of a lack of alcohol?
It would have been in college. Like, I realized that it was any time post high school, really. It was if I wasn't kind of staying lubricated, as they say. The shakes and whatever would start to creep in. And a couple of years after that, the band thing was happening, the working in restaurants thing was happening. So it was being normalized in my life anyways. It was like, by the time I got to Hamtramck, which is the town my wife and I live in now, it's inside Detroit. And I'll talk a little bit more about it later, because that's where passenger recovery is too. But at one point, Hamtramck originally was a Polish immigrant town. And it was all people who came to the United States to work for the automotive companies. And so work hard, play hard. At one point, Hamtramck had more bars per capita than anywhere else in the world. There's a lot of dive bars and makeshift home bars and that kind of thing. So when I got there and was introduced to the culture, it was like, oh, well, I've arrived. These are my people, because there is no stigma attached to anything.
Yeah. No, I see that. Yeah.
So, and that's where I ended up after I lost the ability to drive. I was just working in dive bars there. But yeah, it was mentally and physically, it happened very early on, but I was given permission basically by myself and the culture that I chose to be part of to not have to ever deal with that, because I was staying lubricated. And then along with that, at the same time, I become part of a band where I was, we were fortunate enough to get some real notoriety. And so that culture is it's absolutely, not only is substance use accepted, it's encouraged. It's part of every relationship, whether you're on stage, whether you're talking to fans, whether you're partying at the after party, whether you're being courted by a label, and that's not to lay blame to anybody, because part of my journey is being self-aware and accountable, but it's just that the reality of it is it's everywhere, so that was a big part of it too, is again, I was just given permission to keep going down that path. Yeah.
I think the interesting thing is, because it is everywhere, because it is legal, especially, I'm sure you've heard at least somewhat some stories of how drinking is so culture ingrained in here in the UK, especially, I think the interesting thing that I always found is people experiencing withdrawal symptoms from alcohol, but not knowing they're related to alcohol. Because alcohol is legal, I think so many people, in terms of alcohol awareness campaigns that we run as a service, don't know the impacts that it can have. And when they're having withdrawal, they're thinking, oh, I've got the flu. And maybe they're not even psychologically connecting those two things together in the sense of, oh, well, if I just have another drink, these withdrawal symptoms will go away, because the two are so disconnected. And that's partly down to, I guess, the legality of it. And I think something that, as you've said in your hometown, when it's everywhere, when it is so cultural, it's like, well, that can't possibly be the reason why I'm feeling this way, why I'm experiencing the shakes, the tremors, hallucinations, you know? So I guess there's something in that. And it doesn't happen very often. Most people will have some understanding that, okay, if I drink more, this will go away. But on the occasions where it does, I found it really interesting because of the cultural acceptance of it, because it's everywhere. So would that be your sort of experiences as well? Or?
Oh, yeah. It's funny you say that, because my mind still does that sometimes, where not necessarily that a drink or a drug is going to make it better, but I create illusions about the way I actually drank or used. For example, a couple of winters ago, I was driving down an alleyway near a place where I used to live that was kind of in squalor. It was near the end of my use. And I drove by the house, and I lived there with some very dear friends, one of which is no longer with us due to this. And I drove through this alleyway next to the house, and I was, I'm looking at the house, and it's winter, so there's snow on the ground. And like my mind starts replaying the tape of what it was like there. And there's like, a fire in the fireplace and a Dean Martin record on the record player, and the reality of the inside of that house was Coke residue everywhere on every flat surface, blackout curtains, dirty dishes that had been sitting in the sink for months, and a toilet that was literally falling through the floor, and it's just amazing,
somehow
amazing.
You've managed to romanticize that as something that was quite cozy and cute, and it was like, that's so far from the truth when you really think about it.
Yeah, and it's amazing that it's just amazing that my mind still works like that. It's like another example of that. There's a documentary that was made recently about the making of the Godfather films. It was pretty good. I think it was called The Offer. But, these guys are on the Warner Brothers lot in Hollywood, and they're drinking martinis and they're doing coke. And at some point, and this is like 12 years into recovery, it was a year or so ago. I'm like, a martini, I could probably handle a martini, just because of the way I was watching it being consumed, and again, same thing, no sheets on the mattress, a jug of vodka next to the bed.
But you think you could handle a nice
thing, right? Yeah. But, and I guess for me, that's the reason that I need to stay regular with the support that works for me.
Yeah.
And stay in the community. And that's easy for me now because I've been fortunate enough to see things change in ways I could never imagine. And the things that were working early on, I couldn't really see results. And because I was so, I had lived my adult life on reward systems, and so when I got sober, it was like, okay, I got to get the license back, and I got to get back into Canada because I'd been banned from working in Canada, so I got to get back over there. But while I was hyper focused on these surface level things were happening. Like family members were starting to answer the phone again. People were starting to trust me. Like things that would long term be a real gift in my life were happening, and so through that. Even though I couldn't see those things happening at the time, people just told me to stay at it and keep working with people and keep in communication with people. And, it went from what felt like a punishment to being an opportunity for growth. And that was the mindset change that I needed. It was like, it didn't feel like, my life is just going to be this black and white, thing forever because real changes were happening. And the further I got away from that and looked back, the more I realized that I was sitting in the dark at the end anyways when I was using. I was afraid to change because I didn't know what it looked like. So much so that I was happy to sit in this black hole, of just using and checking out and, in the opposite of a social way, like all night alone, that kind of thing.
I think going back to the martini story that you shared then, I guess that's something that does happen, and one of the conversations we explore, and it's always interesting to get different people's opinions on this, is when does, if ever, recovery become recovered? Talking about those thoughts of, I could handle a martini now.
Right.
What is that like for you as a person to have to, to have those thoughts? And does it, kind of like as you said then, does it ever come into your head thinking, I reckon I could go back to having just the one?
Not in a real way, but that's only because I stay regular.
Yeah.
And for me, this goes into a whole other conversation. Everybody is different. A good friend of mine, when I quit, I went into programs that discussed the past and dealing with the past and dealing with the emotional immaturity that I had and dealing with the things, the baggage I was carrying around and all that shit, all that stuff. A guy that I was at the bar with on the regular was like, well, I'm just going to start going to the gym every day. And that worked for him. So it's not for me to say what path works for who, because if there was a magic ticket answer, all of us would be doing the one thing.
Yeah.
But that's what worked for me. And sorry, where was I going with that?
Go on, wherever. When does it, if ever?
Recovered. Sorry. So that, if there was, exactly. If there was a magic ticket answer, everybody would be doing it. It was an early indicator to me, seeing him do something else and it working for both of us in different ways. That, the recovered thing to me is kind of recovery versus recovered is splitting hairs. I'm not going to tell anybody whether, I believe that the longer I stay personally, I can only answer for myself.
Yeah.
The longer I stay in recovery, the more my life has grown.
Yeah.
And so why would I go back to that thing? I know that I love to do that. I know I love to test the waters, and I know I love to try to get away with things. I'm as addicted to chaos and drama as I am to Coke and booze.
Yeah.
But I've got, luckily, enough time under my belt and enough distance from that last drink to go, I know what will happen if I do that, and it's not worth unraveling everything. Because I proved to myself for like 18 years that I can't handle it.
Yeah.
And the beauty of being in recovery is that it has given me things that I didn't even know I wanted. I say this a lot, but if you would have told me 13 years ago or 12 years ago, in the first year, if you would have told me you're going to eventually be married and have dogs and a kid, I would have laughed and I wouldn't have believed it because it wasn't even something I wanted, even as a sober person. But that's, again, the opportunity to grow and change. I didn't think I could handle those kinds of responsibilities. I didn't think I wanted those kinds of responsibilities. I certainly didn't then. And I wasn't prepared to commit to anything that long term, I had to take the sobriety thing every 24 hours a day. But looking back on it now, it's like, okay, well, things happened. I was tied to the job for an identity, the band. And then the pandemic removed that. And I didn't know it until that happened, until the wheels stopped turning. I was like, oh, wow, this really is like who I think I am still a lot more than I let on. I didn't know I believe that us getting dogs conditioned me to have a kid. I think if I would have gone from 0 to kid, I think our little girl would not be as,
And people laugh at that, but when we had a puppy, I had to get up multiple times throughout the night, and when I tried to, I've got a 3-year-old daughter now, almost 3, but I feel like it did in a way prepare me for those nights and that level of responsibility, because it is a lot. I think some people think, oh, it's just a dog. For me, like the amount of responsibility that comes with, I think people underestimate it sometimes.
Well, and coming from a space that where for years and years and years, all I thought about was number one.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, taking care of even just a creature or two. I had to do it baby steps. Literal baby steps.
Yeah.
In order to be prepared to actually be a dad. But having those realities and the realizations also like, wow, this is something I actually want, you know, and having the confidence to go, I can do this.
Yeah.
I can, you know, if I say because that's something that I've also learned in recovery is if I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a beautiful thing. It used to scare the hell out of me. But
You talked about sitting sort of just in the darkness by yourself, drinking, you know, and that was when you start to make those changes or realize you need to make those changes. What was what was the rock bottom moment that did really turn the light on in your head and think, right, now's the day that I take on sobriety after being in, you know, alcohol addiction for so long? What was it that happened that made you think, right, I'm getting clean from today? Was it something you ever teased or thought about, or was it just like, boom, today's the day I'm going to do it?
The day of my last drink was April 4th, 2011. I had been on the road for a month. I went on a week-long bender, and in Nashville, that was the last drink for me. It had been a long time coming. That night, there were all kinds of, you know, I hadn't had a license for years. I tried to drive the van off the lot. I ran over a laptop. I tried to fight some guys that were involved in the band, like just checking all the boxes for somebody that no longer had control over anything. Yeah. Again, not to go back into war stories, but these were all the things that had just been kind of happening to the point where I woke up and our singer was like, I've been watching you do this for years. I can't do it anymore. And so they threw me off the tour, which also was a very humbling moment. But if I'm being honest, I was kind of like a grown child that had convinced himself he could get away with whatever he wanted because I'd been playing with the band for 9 years at that point. And I didn't respect it. But I still loved music. And I don't, on the surface, I don't know that I would have even admitted to that. I mean, I don't know. I was just checked out. But that rang a bell. You know, I had tried to get sober through the health issues in the past. I had been to treatment twice. But what I hadn't done is commit to anything, you know? So whether it was a suggestion by the courts or the DUIs or the drunk drivings, or, you know, health issues or whatever, I never actually committed myself to it. I never made phone calls. I never started actually doing things to change my direction. Like I said, I wanted things to change without having to change anything. Yeah. This time I went away for a month. I went to a place in the middle of nowhere in Minnesota called The Retreat. It was funded by Music Cares because I had a lot of tax issues and financial issues at that point. I was very fortunate to have things lined up the way they did so that when I genuinely wanted to change and was ready to commit to trying to make a change through action, that there were people there for me that pointed me in the right direction. Yeah. So yeah, that was what was different, is I couldn't convince myself anymore that the consequences weren't happening. And I also was just so tired of letting myself and everyone around me down. You know? I mean, it's, you know, it's a little bit, I think I had a foot in wanting to die and a foot in being terrified of what life would be like without these things. You know, despite knowing what life had been like with them, you know, and sitting in that dark place for so long. Yeah. But I think that was the bell ringer. It's just like the idea of not being able to do this thing that I had already taken for granted for a long time. But, you know, not, and just being exhausted, you know. So I had that window, and I believe a lot. I mean, over the last 10 years, I've worked in treatment centers and I've worked with community mental health organizations between tours, and that's kind of what led to Passenger. And I believe that there is that window with people where you get the window where they can contemplate change. And if you get in there at the right time, you can really, the person has the opportunity to really make a change. But it's very easy for that window to be closed too.
Yeah. So it's a small window as well, isn't it, I guess? So, I guess, how old was you when Electric Six did really take off?
24.
So a very young age. And I suppose even trying to navigate, that level of fame at such a young age may have had it come with its own challenges. But I think, doing an organisation, creating an organisation, I should say, like Passenger Recovery, must come with its own pressures and expectations as well. What does Passenger Recovery offer, and how important is music to the pathway of recovery?
Okay. I'll give you a little bit of background on Passenger. It started a couple years into sobriety. I was on tour with the guys again after I'd gotten clean and gone to treatment. I waited about 8 months. I think that was reasonable, at least, for somebody to be able to adjust the way they prepare for tour, in order to avoid those things. And getting a sponsor for me was something that was imperative, because I needed somebody to, when I really was going to make the effort, I needed somebody to say, hey, by the way, you're going back into this. You need to address it differently. Like, these bars are not your own personal Studio 54. You're going in to do a job and sound check, and then you go get coffee, or you call me, and then you go do the show, and then you pack up and you go, because that's a job that you are not now functioning in. It never occurred to me that's how it was supposed to be done. But it was very helpful to have people, that had experiences before, and people who could guide me through the process. So a couple years into sobriety, I was in Canada, in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and it was like a 10-hour drive from Calgary. So we're heading back to the east from the west. It was a long drive. By the time we got there, it was dark out. Coffee shops were closed. Everything was kind of shut down, and the bar we were playing didn't have a green room. So it was the middle of winter. It was the Midwest. So it was really just like, in Canada, so no phone service. For me, it was either I have to sit in a bar and wait to perform a show, or I have to sit in a freezing cold van with a trailer. And I don't know why that was the moment. It was just like, there has to be a better way to do this. There has to be something in the Midwest, because there wasn't a lot at the time. So that was the beginning of trying to do something in the community with, the little bit of juice that I had, and that made sense in Detroit. So when I got done with that tour, I went back home and talked to a friend of mine who was an art therapist at a local treatment center that I'd actually been to when I was a younger guy. She was a dear friend who had also been in kind of the music scene, garage rock scene there. And I was like, hey, I've got this idea. I'd really like to help people who are on tour, who are trying to stay sober. Because in Hamtramck, a lot of the bands that come through town get their start in Hamtramck. It's a lot of dive bars, like I mentioned, but it also has a fascinating music history, It was a cornerstone for the Detroit techno movement. Before that, people like Carl Perkins and like rockabilly, Jack Scott, like people from rockabilly, years, 50s and 60s, played places there. I think the White Stripes played their second show ever there. Anyways, and it's like a mile and a half from the original Motown studios. So it's a cool place, steeped in cool musical history. But, so those are the people that I wanted to cater to, as people who were coming through playing these dive bars that didn't have green rooms and didn't have tour buses and were really struggling. So I was talking to this art therapist friend about it. She was like, that's a great idea. You're not ready to do that yet. So she suggested I come work at the treatment center. So I did. I worked there for 3 years as a milieu tech, so like a community technician. She called it the glue, the people who with shared experience, lived experience, that would work beneath the clinical staff and the nursing staff. And that was a great opportunity, really being on the front lines, talking to people on a daily basis who were going through detox, convincing them, just sharing experiences.
And that's so important though, isn't it? To have people who have those shared experiences, to see that visible recovery, as we'd call it, because I remember having a situation. So I manage a team of what you'd call community technicians, those people with lived experience to help our service users. And there was one guy before who was adamant that the volunteers that I had on board who were in recovery were paid actors, who was lying because he said nobody gets clean. And he said it was all, and he was adamant, 100% adamant that nobody does it. And he said the ones that, he said they've never done it. He went, you're just paying them to say that they've done it, or they're lying. And it was so interesting to be that closed off to the idea that a life without drugs, alcohol was even possible, because to him, he just could not see a way out of it. And he thought if he couldn't do it, then nobody else could do it either. And it wasn't until that team really spent time with him that really started to break down those barriers. And he started to say, oh, so that, what works for you, and talking detox preparation, all this stuff. But clinical staff couldn't get through to him. Case coordinators couldn't get through to him.
Right.
It was the people with lived experience. So the idea of them being the glue that holds it all together, I am 100% behind that.
Yeah.
Because that person wouldn't have made even one step forward, I don't think, had he not had those people to work with.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the clinicians, could be the people that save your life eventually, but there has to be somebody or some way to relate to someone. In Detroit, I worked for this organization called Face Addiction Now. That's a great organization. When our daughter was first born, I came off the road. I wasn't touring nearly as much to be with her and my wife. And we did this thing called QRTs, Quick Response Team, where we would go out, like people with shared experience, and the peer support specialists would go out with the police to check in on people who had either gotten in trouble with the law for a drug or alcohol related offense, or who had overdosed. And we actually went to the front doors, say, hey, we're just here to check in with you. This is the police department. It was really interesting on a lot of levels, because the shared experience would get the person's attention, but also they would see the police in a relaxed manner. So it kind of like humanized the police, and vice versa. The police would see people in a different light that were just kind of rinse and repeat participants in the community. You know what I mean?
It humanizes everyone on all levels, doesn't it?
Exactly. Right. I mean, when I first started working with them, I was making the joke, as I'm sure everybody else has, like, wow, I never thought I'd be in in the back of the car cuffed up the way I had been in the past. And not shockingly, you get to work with local police and you find out that their addiction runs through their families just like everybody else's, Excuse me. And going to meet with these people at their doorstep, it just, like, I think it's also beneficial for the police, because it's true. I mean, I think anybody who does their job where they go through the same routines over and over and over again without these tiny little changes that ultimately lead to a better direction. You get exhausted, you're overworked, and you just kind of follow the same protocol. And so for that, it was getting to see people that they had just arrested, trying a different take on it and trying a different approach was beneficial. But the program was cool because the guy that trained me said, don't lead talking about substance use disorder or drugs or alcohol. Incentivize these people. When you go to their door, explain why you're there, explain that you understand their history, but then lead with something that's going to make them want to consider change. Whether it's getting a driver's license back, we can do that. Do you need food assistance? We can do that. Do you need Medicaid or health insurance? Okay, let's, because nobody instantly wants to get vulnerable with a stranger,
Absolutely,
but if you can lead with something that they're interested in, then you've got a foot in the door and you can ultimately talk about real change with regards to the substance use.
Yeah. I think that's why SMART goals for me are so important. Those really small changes, because I think I could work with someone for a year, and after a year, for opiate substitute medication and things like methadone, people can be on methadone for years. And it might be 12 months later, they're on the same dose of methadone, and they're thinking, I haven't done fuck all in like the last year. But then you actually list off all the SMART goals that they have achieved, such as getting their driver's license, rebuilding those relationships with family, attending more support groups. And you're like, well, actually, you look at all these little changes in comparison to where you are a year ago. Yes, you're still on, 50, 60, 70 mil of methadone, but look at all these other things around you that have changed, and that is, I guess, the incentive, isn't it? Here's how you can improve your life in a much bigger way, but in very small steps, building to that.
Right. Yeah. Look at how everything else has changed.
The bigger picture sort of thing. Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. I guess getting into the band at a young age, and having these problems with alcohol, there's a thing in relation to, I guess, substances and creativity. How has sobriety changed your relationship with creativity, and what lessons have you learned about maintaining balance in such a, I guess, emotionally demanding industry?
I think that at the end of my use, and I couldn't even convince myself that I was being creative anymore. I mean, I talked about it every night. I talked about my grandiose plans. And this isn't, I'm not whipping myself over my behaviors. I've come to terms with a lot of that stuff, and it's fine. It's something that happened, and it doesn't happen anymore. But there was a lot of, on a regular basis, if not a nightly basis, whether anyone else was around or not, there was a lot of talk about change. Yeah. And like, one day I'm going to do this, one day I'm going to do that with the music, and this is going to happen, and this is going to happen. And then it was just the cycle of insanity would continue. So if I'm being honest, nothing was getting done for the last few years. Like, I really wasn't, there was no creative output. And now my relationship with creativity changes quite a bit, as it should, because that's a normal relationship, right? Things change, and things kind of ebb and flow. When I first got sober, I put a side project together with some friends. It was a great experience, not an easy one. We're all friends, but it turned out things didn't work necessarily as well on the creative level. So it lasted a couple of years, and it was a great time, but it ended when it should have, and that was fine. During the pandemic, got together with a friend of mine and did another side project, and it was fantastic because it was just he and I. There weren't too many cooks in the kitchen. We kind of did it at our own pace. Yeah. It allowed us to be as creative as we wanted to be. We also couldn't go outside, so it taught me a lot about how I create as an addict, because what I learned was my window of real creative healthy activity is about 3 hours, but I would tend to spend more like 7 or 8 hours at a time because I'm an addict. So if a little bit is good, a lot is better, until my head's on fire. But yeah, and that's the truth too. That has definitely, like, I've had to be mindful about that, like my creativity, like treating it like with addict behaviors. But this particular project was great. It didn't ever go anywhere, but he and I ended up, it ended up doing well commercially with like local, with the motor car companies in Detroit, so we never even played a show. Excuse me. But had we not done it in the first place, we would never have had the opportunities to make connections to do these behind the scenes commercial things, which have been great extra income. And that was a cool project because it was just that there's nobody telling us to do anything.
It's at your own pace.
Completely up to us.
Was you worried, like, oh God, I'm not going to be as creative as I used to be? Because I think even though you said in those later days that Do you might think, you said you wasn't being very creative yourself, but you kind of convinced yourself. Did that ever cross your mind? Like, maybe I'm not going to be as good as this now I'm sober. What's it going to be?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hilarious to look back on because, I was thinking in Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix terms.
Yeah.
It was just like,
course, yeah.
I'm the keyboardist for Electric Six.
Yeah,
That's the reality of this situation.
No, still, but of course, that's the thing, isn't it? I guess.
Well, I mean, it ties into the lessons in humility. I remember I was sitting with our singer, and we were at sound check, and we were talking about like self-obsession because he was kind of just. It was cool of him. He was cool enough to be interested in the process, that I was going through. He's like, so we're sitting at sound check. He's like, so you were kind of like, when you say self-obsessed, you're thinking that the world revolves around you, right? You're the center of the universe. And it was like, well, yeah, that's kind of the mentality. And he looks at the stage. He's like, yeah, but you're not even the center of the stage.
There's another bit of humility for like, thanks, man.
Exactly. Yeah. And we both start cracking up because not only is that the truth, but how that's really that's the hard truth. Is that but that's another thing I love about the band too is like not just I can trace back my addict behaviors not just through like family history and everything else, but like the band, I'm the guy in the corner with sunglasses on, hiding behind two keyboards, wanting to be adored, but don't get too close. It was the perfect spot for an alcoholic. Yeah. You know what I mean? I didn't have to show anybody anything, but I still got the attention. Yeah. It's just...
No one would know, but you're still getting reaping the rewards sort of thing, aren't you? Without necessarily being under the microscope for it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Stigma around addiction, obviously we know that can be one of the biggest barriers to recovery. How has your own experience with stigma shaped the way you approach advocacy, and what advice would you give to others facing similar challenges?
Well, that definitely ties in with what we were just talking about. Like, in my experience with the music industry is the stigma is the opposite. You are encouraged, like we talked about, to get into it. So when I got into peer support specialist territory and community mental health, it was really like, I don't really know as much about this world, But there's no question, of course, that's still a big part of it. I mean, even right down to the language, and I guess that ties back in with Passenger. Like, we started out as this thing that was helping touring musicians. We started out as a couple of people that were local musicians that wanted to do something. So we started telling promoters, like, we'll take people to support groups. We'll figure out if they need information to take with them, we can do that. And it was for 7 years, it was a volunteer organization. It was just us giving people rides and then eventually doing like music mixer advocacy events at bars because that's our workplace. And just saying, hey, we're not here to browbeat anybody, but here's some entertainment, but we'll be in the corner if you have questions or, want to talk about something or need some information. And that was really effective. You have to meet people where they're at.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wasn't going to go ask questions I didn't really want answers to, when it came to addressing my addiction. And I spent most of my life in the bars. So that was kind of the driving force behind that. And then ultimately did a lot of like Narcan and harm reduction at local like sports and entertainment events. Yeah. Did a clean green room at local music festivals, which is just exactly what it sounds like. And then ultimately we opened the community center last year. And what we've tried to do with that is create as neutral grounds as possible. We partner with organizations that are really like, end the stigma. And we talk about it all the time there, but it's not something we really campaign hard with because I think, our community center is 1 foot in recovery it's literally 1 foot in recovery, 1 foot in pop culture and things that are enticing to people, like we just talked about. If people walk in, they're going to see De La Soul on the wall. They're going to see books about John Coltrane. They're going to be able to play some music. There'll be instruments. There are community internet hubs. So there are things that will be interesting to people that have never had a welcoming space, particularly for us, the LGBTQ plus populations. You know, there were, before we started in Hamtramck, there were 2 meetings period a week there. And a lot of the populations won't go anywhere near a church. Never mind like having this kind of arts and culture atmosphere to try and welcome people and just allow them to, you know, we have 8 support groups a week, but we also want them to just be able to feel comfortable existing as people that are making changes. Everything doesn't have to be about recovery, you know, which is why we offer all the other things. So I guess to answer the question, that's a long way of saying, yes, we promote organizations that are lean into the anti-stigma campaigns. And what we try to do is just welcome people who may have experienced that and into an area that is as welcoming to everybody. So that, you know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah. So I've just personally done some trauma-informed training, as they called it. And one of the big things that we talked about in that training was a PI, which is a psychologically informed environment. And the idea being that, as you've said, you kind of have to go out to people as opposed to expecting necessarily them to come to you. And there's a couple of things to that. Like, I'm aware that even here, if you come into our reception environment, if you're someone who is neurodiverse, for instance, it's quite loud in there. The lights as well can be quite bright. All these sort of things can be quite off-putting. So I guess what you've described there, to me, that sounds like an environment that if I was struggling, I could go in there. And I think personally, with me where I'm at, I'd walk in there and I'd feel at ease instantly. It sounds like it's very psychologically informed, as we'd call it.
Yep, that's the goal. And lighting was a big part of it. As were the designs, the colors, trying to make everything as positive and upbeat as possible without turning the whole place into a meme.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Realistic, like inspiring real confidence in people.
Absolutely.
You know, I do believe that stigma is a very real thing, but I also know that for me personally, the only thing that was going to make me be able to dismiss that kind of thing was more confidence in myself, but healthy confidence instead of self-obsession. Okay, I can do these things. I've been able to do them. I'm plugged into a community of people who are very capable people that had the same problems that I did. You know?
The stigma thing is interesting, especially when you said, you know, for you as a musician, it's the opposite. It's almost encouraged, you know. Right. I guess with that, was there any, I suppose concern isn't the word I'm looking for, but the idea of that you're no longer going to be fun. You're no longer going to be the Chris that everybody knew in those environments, because so much of the fabric of what made you was being under the influence of substances. So the stigma of being in recovery in those environments is almost like, oh, he's boring now because he doesn't drink. Yeah, he doesn't. Did you experience that at all, or was that just,
yeah. I had a guy that I used to do some music with that had told a mutual friend, like, you know, Tate's no fun anymore. Yeah. And it got back to me and it was like, luckily it was long enough into recovery for me. It was like, he's right.
Yeah.
I don't have to be Good Time Charlie anymore.
Yeah.
I don't have to be the chameleon. I don't have to be a different version of me to whoever is sitting in front of me at any given time. It definitely would have hit a very different way if I'd been earlier in recovery, for sure. And I think it did at times before when I tried to quit. Because I never committed to it. I remember wandering around my neighborhood in Detroit, like trying to get past the bar, just walking around that summer, trying to get past the bars without noticing anybody, or I just had no direction. I didn't know what to do with myself because I had surrounded everything. I doused everything in alcohol like it had shaped my life. But once I made the commitment and had a little bit of time under my belt, it was easier for me. 'Cause, that's definitely a real thing.
Yeah.
And it did happen a few times with friends. And that's another beautiful side of the recovery thing, is being able to say, that's a real response. You know, that is, this guy saw me as Good Time Charlie in a little bit of a clown show for a while, and I was a funny guy. I don't have to be that person anymore. I can look back on that, and it doesn't affect me at this point. Because I've gotten more in touch with the person who I really am. You know, and the guys in the band had seen the real dark side too. Yeah. So I was very fortunate in the respect that they were very gung-ho about me trying to make a real change because they knew how it was going to go otherwise.
How did they handle the change then? Do you know, was they cautious about the environments that they was in with you or anything like that? Did they make any changes themselves into how they acted around, like, so I guess one of the things you sometimes see is Christmas, for instance. Do you know, mum's recently gone sober, so no alcohol in the house at Christmas sort of thing. So nobody else drinks because they're worried it could be a trigger for mum or something like that. Did any changes like that happen, or was it just like, you do your thing, we do our thing?
With the band, it was very much like the hard alcohol was either kept somewhere else or I didn't see it for a while, which was kind of a gift. Yeah. You know, that was definitely what was my issue. I think that I don't know that they really knew. Why would they know how to handle something like that? I think they were as kind of in the dark as I was. But they did what they could with what they had, with what they knew. You know what I mean? Like they hid the hard alcohol. They weren't really partying hardcore when I was around. And at the same time, if I'm being completely honest, another big moment of clarity for me when I sobered up was realizing that nobody else was really partying the way I was.
Yeah. So that it goes back to that romanticizing things, like, so you've got all these memories, like, it used to be like this. It was like, no, it wasn't like this for us. That was just you who was in that place. Yeah, I can see it. That's brilliant.
Right.
It's nice that even just making small changes is such a big thing, because I think in sobriety, in a weird way, we found out like who our real friends are as well, because going back to the stigma, it could be like, oh, we're not going to invite Chris anymore because Chris isn't fun. But the friends that still do turn up and the friends that do make those changes, they're the real friends. And I think there is something in finding out that, you know, I guess who really is there to support you and who really has your back when you make such a big change like that in your life.
Absolutely. It's my yardstick for that. One of them is the Hamtramck Labor Day Festival, because it was this 4-day weekend of debauchery for years and years and years with me and some other people. Again, I don't know if anybody was going at it as hard. I'm sure some people were. But for the first couple of years I was sober, I wouldn't go near it. And, you know, there was a period of, I resented the people who could still drink like that, and then there was a period of, I'm too good for those for that festival. You know what I mean? Yeah, it was like the stages of grief or something. Yeah, in a weird
No, I can see that. Yeah,
and until, you know, 13 years on, or actually starting at 11 years on in my recovery, we started doing Narcan tables there and harm reduction and passing along community resources to people, and by the time we started with those tables and tents, it was like, you know what? These people aren't trying. It just is. Yeah. You know what I mean? I see people walking by that I used to party with. Some of them are partying now. Some of them aren't. Some of them are still friends. Some of them aren't. And it's all okay. It doesn't matter. Maybe booze or drugs were the things that tied us together in the first place, and we don't have any connection without them. That's okay. Maybe I have a stronger connection with some people that I wouldn't have had I still been partying. All of it is okay. It's to try and figure it out is pointless. The important part for me is to let all that go and to stop carrying that shit around. Yeah, because it doesn't matter. No, I can't. You know, it's like, I'm not going to move forward. But those realizations are really important. They're really cool because it doesn't matter. Like, and I understand, thanks to like making a change, but having awesome people in my life that I can reflect with. I understand why I went through all those stages. You know, it makes total sense. And, you know, I was 34 when I quit drinking, so there was a huge lack in emotional maturity. And so I'm feeling like I'm missing out, and then I'm resentful of it, and then I'm self-righteous about it. And all that's okay, because I have a better life now. And even if I didn't, it would be like chapters of change. Yeah. You know, to where I get to a point where it's like, that's okay for them. It's not okay for me anymore. That's all.
And accepting that as well. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I get that. So Metropolis Records has recently launched a campaign, a call to action in partnership with Passenger Recovery. Can you tell us more about this initiative, how it came to be, and the impact you hope it will have on musicians struggling with addiction?
Yeah. So Dave Heckman, who was the founder of Metropolis, passed away recently, in the last couple of years. And Metropolis, Dave Heckman also was the person that was a big fan of Electric Six. And we had been, in the first few years of our existence, there was the big first record. And then we were dropped. And that was a lesson in humility, because we were still doing like Top of the Pops. We were still doing shows. Like, wait a minute. We're at the peak of things. And the people at that record, it's the same thing. The people at that record label were fantastic to us. They were great human beings. But it's a business, and we're like, we're still doing these, having success with these songs, and their response as business people were like, yeah, but that's all we think you got in the canon was that first record, and so we're gonna let you go. And then we signed to Warner Brothers for the second one, and then got dropped from there. And I mean, the reality is, it's the same thing. It's like, it's just a change in perspective. Yeah. Of seeing. And anyways, I'm going off on all kinds of tangents here. Like me going, what do you mean we're a one-hit wonder? And they're going, well, we've decided you are, or we've decided we want to go in a different direction. It doesn't matter. You're not going to talk us back into working with you. Even though they were super cool people, that's just life and that's business. But, what, again, like these winks that were happening in my life, a big one was, while we were stressing about all that stuff, the fan base was just growing and growing and growing, and people were handing those records down to their nephews and nieces and little brothers and sisters. And so I think the established cult fan base that we have now is due to that kind of like long-term fan base beyond the big hits that we had. Anyways, a couple years in, we got a call from Dave Heckman, and he was the founder of Metropolis Records, which is a goth industrial label. So Electric Six has always been like the redheaded stepchild of this label. But they're one of two big American goth industrial labels. They just, last week, they put out a duet with Boy George and Peter Murphy from Bauhaus. So they still, I mean, they have been around for a while, and they're a terrific label. And for whatever reason, Dave was like a big fan of Electric Six. He's like, I want you on the label. And he was great in the respect that he gave us a career with longevity. He was great in the respect that I would send him side projects, and he would give me the truth. Which is like, I'm not interested in this. I'm interested in this, but it needs X, Y, and Z. He was very real. Yeah. And even with criticisms, I really appreciated that. Instead of just kind of writing it off or not responding to emails, he would take the time to go, this is why I don't like what you're sending me. But also, he was a real mentor for the band, and he was like, I mean, he was always like that with his artists. So he passed away a couple of years ago, and we had become very close with his wife and his daughter, Gail and Nina, who now run the label. And when I was talking to them after we'd opened the community center, I just kind of it was a really natural conversation about losing people in the pandemic, the struggles of dealing with touring, the lifestyle, the culture around the music industry, all those things. And we realized that we had all had so many friends that were dealing with so much. And they were impressed with what we'd done with the community center after 7 years of pretty hard work. We kind of finally got the recognition from the state of Michigan to be able to support something like that. And so they wanted to do something in Dave's honor, and to kind of celebrate his legacy, and try to bring awareness to the issues that musicians and crew and anybody who is part of a music industry touring lifestyle has to face. That I believe that we all have different versions of the same story, people in recovery. But there are specific things to that lifestyle that, of course, start with the workplace, right?
Yeah.
So we've been working on it for a little while, and we're really excited. They're going to do a CD compilation with some rarities from some of their artists, and those the tracks will be released in the coming weeks, kind of like one by one. Electric Six will be on there. We did a remix a few years ago that was never released, that kind of thing. But the money is going to go towards expanding our services, which we're really excited about.
That sounds really good.
Yeah, at the moment, like I said, we do peer support services. We do eight support groups a week, connect people with food assistance and health insurance and treatment or detox if they need it. For touring musicians, we do everything I mentioned, like harm reduction, clean green room, we drive people to meetings. But with the community center, it would allow us to have more space to do things like music therapy or something on a regular basis that would be impactful in a different way.
It sounds amazing. I just trying to imagine having something local like that here. I know, obviously, we cover some of those things, but the way that music can be related to, I guess, helping people move forward in that way is so important as well. You know, looking at people's individual passions as well and bringing that forward as well.
Yeah. Opening the community center was a real moment for us because we had helped touring musicians, people who were obviously passionate about music.
Yeah.
And it allowed us to pivot to keep that mission going, but also use music and the arts just to, to enrich the lives of people who are interested in exploring recovery.
That's brilliant. Chris, thank you so much. Is there anything else that you want to go over before we wrap it up, or?
I really appreciate your time.
No, honestly, it's been absolutely fantastic. I like to finish all of my podcasts that we do in honour of James Lipton. We carried on the tradition of asking 10 questions at the end, and they are unrelated.
We're doing the inside the actor's
absolutely.
studio.
Yeah.
Okay,
so,
refresh me.
What's your favourite word?
One of them is curmudgeon.
What?
Curmudgeon.
Curmudgeon? I've never heard that in my life.
You don't know what a curmudgeon is?
No.
It's like a Grinch.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Least favourite word?
God, that's a good one. What's my least favorite word? These days? Winter.
Tell me something that excites you.
God, I'm really failing at this. My daughter is into the movie Coco. I'm very excited about that because that's a terrific music movie with a beautiful story.
I've seen it a few times now, and every time it gets to the end, I watch it with my daughter. I always cry. At least there's always a little tear at that last sort of lullaby. I just feel my eyes well up a little bit.
It's so intense, man.
And I realise she's not even watching at this point. It's just me, and there we go. But no, I absolutely love it. What doesn't excite you?
Yeah, this is funny. This all kind of goes to the relativity and perspective thing that we've been talking about this whole time. What doesn't excite me at the moment? Because I've made poor choices in the last few days with regards to caffeine and diet. The idea of getting back on the road, having come off a ferry, does not excite me.
Yeah, nice.
20 years ago, I would have been like, oh my God, I'm getting on I'm getting on a ferry from the Netherlands to go to the UK to play.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for all of it. But at the moment, the travel is wearing out.
Yeah, I can see that. What sound or noise do you love?
The rain.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Hotel fire alarms.
What's your favourite swear word?
Shit.
If you wasn't a musician, what profession would you like to attempt?
Zoologist.
What profession would you not like to do?
Mortician.
And then lastly, if heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
You did your best.
That's brilliant. Chris, thank you so much for becoming on Believe in People. You have been fantastic.
Thank you.
And if you've enjoyed this episode of the Believe in People podcast, please check out the other episodes and hit that subscribe button. We're on Apple Music and Spotify, so please like and subscribe to be notified about our new episodes. You can also search for the Believe in People podcast on your favourite listening device, and if you can leave us a review, that will really help us in getting our message